Welcome to this episode of Outside Ourselves. I am your host, Kelsi. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with my first ever guest on Outside Ourselves, Dave Zahl. Dave is back to talk about his newest book, The Big Relief, The Urgency of Grace in a Worn Out World. Dave is using the metaphor of relief to describe and bring to life the reality of God's grace and how grace meets us in the most unexpected places in life. And in this episode, he walks us through his thought process behind the book and what he hopes readers will gain. As always, Dave is so good at giving helpful and I think relevant language to the realities of Christ crucified for you and how we not only experience the pressure and the condemnation of the law in life, and yet how God's promise of his unmerited favor, his grace, and his relief for us through Christ's work on the cross is a promise that is sure, and that while we may just get glimpses of it in this life, does stand for you and for me. So with that, here is today's episode. Dave, it's so good to see you. Welcome back to Outside Ourselves. You mentioned this before we were recording. I'm going to say it. You said you were going to say it, but you are actually my first ever guest on Outside Ourselves. So good to see you. So glad that you are back. And I think that interview still has like the highest numbers of all my interviews. Maybe because you've had the most time for people to listen to it, but take that as a win.
Well, Kelsi, thanks for having me on. And that was, what a wonderful show you've made this into. So it's nice to be back and to reap the benefits of your now years of expertise. So.
Yes, I've grown so much, changed so much. No, we're here today because you have a new book coming out. Last time we talked about your book, Low Anthropology. Today we're talking about your book, The Big Relief. So I would love, for those who did not catch your inaugural interview on Outside Ourselves, don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about who you are and then a little bit about the book.
Sure. Well, how do I identify it these days? I don't know.
What's in your bio these days?
What's in my bio? I'm David Zahl, and I live in Virginia. I have 3 sons and a wife who's an artist, and they're sort of they're a little older than they were the last time we spoke. So 14, 12, and 8. And I run something called Mockingbird, which is a platform similar to 1517. And we talk about grace and everyday life. And we try to talk about the gospel and how it intersects with culture and with, just all sorts of areas of contemporary existence. And I also write books, and I also am on part-time staff, quarter-time staff here at our church, Christ Episcopal in Charlottesville, Virginia. So I preach some, that's who I am. And this new book is called The Big Relief: The Urgency of Grace for a Worn Out World, and I consider it to be something like the 3rd book in a trilogy, almost, of books where I've really attempted to translate some of the historic truths of the Christian faith that I find most enlivening and animating into contemporary language. And so with Seculosity, I wrote a book called Seculosity, and that was really trying to talk about how justification by faith, what that's like in a world of replacement religions, and how our urge to justify ourselves sort of drives us, runs us ragged.
Yeah.
And then Low Anthropology was an attempt to talk about sin and creatureliness and the bondage of the will. I know you've got a confessional audience, at least in part, who would be familiar with that phrase. So just to try to take those are much more difficult topics and transpose them into a contemporary context in a way that I hopefully was winsome, palatable, without watering things down too much.
Yeah.
And then The Big Relief is I want to talk about grace, the grace of God, and its many echoes. But in my own life, and the life of Mockingbird, certainly, grace has been a central concern, and a deep, deep thirst and preoccupation. Um, and so I wanted to try to convey that in as cogent and accessible a way as I could using the tools at my disposal. So that's what
Yeah.
this book is. It's a little bit of a shift. Like low anthropology was a slight downer. It was a downer in service of, I think, compassion,
Mm-hmm.
unity, love, and
Mm-hmm.
the gospel. But this is a little bit more upbeat, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
so
think so. I'm just curious, did you find it a little bit easier to write for that reason?
no, I have a much easier time writing about dark stuff.
Yeah.
I just personally, this is harder. I
Okay.
mean, uh, I really wanted it to feel like, you're like a drink of cold water. I really wanted it to
Hmm.
feel like relief. And that's not always my lived reality. I live under the law, and I grapple with demons just like everyone. And yet,
Hmm.
my best moments and the moments that have defined my life have always been moments of grace, of some kind of love that is coming from God, feeling addressed in that way. But those are fewer. Those tend to be like the climax of the movie rather than the
Yeah.
most of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but my attempt was to distill and to collect and to codify, organize the best of what I think Christianity has to offer to people who are just drowning in demand.
Hmm.
So there's an urgency to it, and I knew it was an urgency for me personally. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, it's I think even Bono, when he was talking about U2, he said joy is a much, much harder thing to write about or to convey in a song than
Hmm.
sorrow. And
That's really interesting.
I'm not sure this book is. I think there is a lot of joy in this book, but it's more challenging to write convincingly about good things. It's the same thing I think in fiction. Vince Gilligan, who's the guy who ran the show Breaking Bad and Better
Right.
Call Saul, when
Mm-hmm.
he was talking to the Writers Guild of America recently, and he said, write good guys. Try to write a few, the white hat. It's much harder. It's so much harder to write a convincing hero than a convincing villain. And
Is it
so,
does it just come across as like cheesy or unrealistic? Do you think is that part of the challenge to make it seem like it's not too easy or something?
yeah, I think it can be cheap. I think it can be greeting card. If you paper over the darkness, then the light doesn't seem very
Right.
light.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that we revert to platitudes very easily, and it's just I remember honestly, Kelsi, I remember being at a 1517 conference and having given a talk that I thought was great, right? And I was proud of it, and I thought, I really, really
Killed it.
killed it. And I had a very, very perceptive woman say, "You preach the law really, really compellingly."
Mm.
And with a lot of with depth and perception or something like that. And she says, I think you could try to use to take some of that energy and preach the gospel with that degree of concentration and skill. And I mean, of course, all I heard was the law when she said that. I just
Right.
heard
Yeah.
criticism, but
Thanks, lady.
she was right. She was right. I mean,
Hmm.
it's a lot harder to get the words of grace across than it is to we're much more familiar with condemnation.
Yeah. I think that there's definitely truth to that. Even when I think about my job at 1517 in editing, trying to, for myself and for our contributors, trying to kind of push that, like, spend as much time, if you're spending a lot of time on the law, great, but like spend as much time on the gospel. Don't have it be like the the footnote at the very end or the last sentence or whatever.
Mm.
Kind of draw it out a little bit. I think, yeah, I resonate with that for sure. So, um, well, let's get into it. I want to know, and I think it will be good for people who are listening or watching to kind of have a definition for grace at the outset. And you do such a good job in the book of giving that. So, how should we define grace? How do you define it in the book? And then also, I think just to follow that through, you're using this metaphor or synonym of relief for
Mm.
grace throughout the book. So why that word? What does that kind of give to our overall understanding of what God's grace is?
Yeah, I mean, this is a hard thing because grace means different things to different people, and it means different things. And I'm not just talking about within Christianity. It means something different when you talk about a ballerina or what the prayer you say before dinner.
Sure. Yeah.
It has a lot of different meanings, and I want to acknowledge that grace is a I like how elastic it can be. Like I think it's, but I also believe there's content to it. So I don't want
Mm.
to say that although Baptists use it in a different way than Roman Catholics, like I think that there is some shape we can give it that and I would fall in a more sort of reformational Lutheran version of what grace is. So I throw out a bunch of slogans that I think work for grace, just as shorthand almost.
Mm.
Grace is a gift with no strings attached. Grace is unmerited favor. Grace is unwarranted generosity. Grace is non-contingent alliance.
Mm.
Grace is it's an interruption, a surprising interruption, a surprising and positive interruption in the quid pro quo that defines most of our lives. One way love is another way to define grace. I mean, for
Yeah.
me in this book, I'm saying grace is the big relief at the heart of Christianity. And so those are all different ways of talking about grace. I think that it can bear the weight of different shadings here. But the word so when I was writing the book, because grace is it's one of those words. I think Frederick Buechner said it has somehow remained positive for people. Like
Oh, yeah. Sure.
it is like a lot of religious words have kind of become tarnished from overuse.
Mm-hmm.
Grace has become maybe a little confusing, but it still connotes something positive. And so as I was listening to folks in the world talk about relief, I just noticed that almost everyone I encountered in my life, and I know that's a limited scope, but they would use the word relief to in reference to the positive things happening in their life.
Mm.
And that said two things. It said that pressure was a very common experience, almost unsaid. But when my colleague who finally found childcare for her toddler said it was a huge relief.
Mm.
Another colleague who had finally come into his own and was no longer trying to be the same person his predecessor was. He says, it's been such a relief to just sort of finally use the gifts I've been given rather than try to
Yeah.
pretend. But, when I'd gotten a check in the mail that I'd been waiting for, I referred to it as a relief. So what is relief? Relief is the feeling of pressure being removed. And I think grace removes pressure. Grace is,
Mm.
if the law puts pressure on, grace is the answer to that. But relief also, I say that when I was a kid, there was a hurricane that hit our town in Charleston, South Carolina, like a massive Category 5 hurricane, and we were out of school for like 4 weeks afterwards. And
Oh,
it
wow.
gives me the shivers, now as a
Yeah.
parent. But the government coordinated relief efforts, and what that was help to people in a
Mm-hmm.
desperate situation, and that was money, that was contractors, chainsaws, etc. So there's an element when you talk about relief, you're talking about gratuity, you're talking about pressure being removed, you're talking about deliverance, you're talking about help, and all of those things sort of coalesce for me under the banner of grace.
Yeah.
Um, but relief, I mean, I don't know anyone doesn't want relief,
Right. Yeah. There's also something to it. I mean, you don't talk about relief in the sense of you, most of the time, I don't think in the sense of you personally figuring out the solution. Like it seems like it always is something, or maybe mainly something that comes to you from outside of yourself, from someone else, right?
Yeah. I'm like someone takes, maybe if you're carrying a heavy load, someone takes it,
Right.
who's not you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Certainly when we were with the hurricane, we were it was it was the government who was providing relief. If you're a pitcher and you've pitched a whole game and you need help, who comes in? A relief pitcher comes in at the end
Mm-hmm.
who's not you. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are instances, I think, where we have a realization that is a relief. So I don't want to
Yeah.
pin it down too much.
Right.
But ultimate relief, what I believe the relief at the heart of when we talk about grace as relief, we're talking about something, yes, on the show Outside Ourselves, we are talking about something from the outside,
Yeah.
that God is in the business of relief,
Mm-hmm.
not just rescue. But I think I actually try to include rescue under the heading of relief.
Mm. Your initial story, I think it's your initial story in your introduction, where you're kind of walking through your day and talking about, it almost feels like you're talking about all these pressures building and trying to escape them or find relief from them. I related to so much. Like I was reading it and I was like, that's exactly what I do. Like I just tried to get out from under the kids or the deadlines or whatever it may be. Do you think, when we're talking about this kind of longing for relief and this building of pressure or burden, do you think that that is a problem that is just of our day and age, or is it a kind of an age old problem? Maybe it's been repackaged a little bit, but the way that we talk about those things does seem to be very relatable to the way we live our lives today. So I'm curious if you see it as kind of, yeah, an issue of our culture or just a human issue in general.
Well, I think it's a human issue.
Yeah.
I think it's only there because this is how we operate, and there would be pressures that you would live under in 13th century Spain. They'd be different. I think that there does feel like something. One of the reasons I wanted to write the book is that although I can intellectually know that human beings have always craved relief and grace, we've always craved the relief of grace. My experience as a 45-year-old is of a treadmill getting faster. And so I want to say intellectually, I know that we're not, there's nothing, everyone believes they're at the unique point of history. Every
Sure. Yeah.
generation has always believed that. And I want to avoid that pitfall, but I also want to acknowledge that when I hear that contemporary parents spend on average 40% more time with their children than a generation previous did, like, where's that time coming from? It's
Yeah.
like there does seem to be escalating demand on people, financial demand. I mean, talk about it, like inflation. Try
Mm-hmm.
buying a
Mm-hmm.
car these days. Like it's not what it felt like when I was
Or eggs.
18. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can go there, but so there's something. The hinge point there might have been ways to talk about grace in previous times that positioned it in other kinds of ways, and would foreground different elements of what it means to be like the judgment of God pressing down on you, for example. Like that, I
Yeah.
think that a peasant in 16th century Germany, for example, would have felt, or a monk
Mm-hmm.
certainly, in a way that I'm not sure like a businessman in Manhattan today would. However, do
Yeah.
they feel the weight of judgment and justify themselves and to provide more than their parents did while also being more present with every single relationship? That is, I think that's true. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm trying. I even try it in the outset not to say that we live in a uniquely merciless or unforgiving time, even though it feels that way.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we don't live in a very merciless and unforgiving time. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the language you're using um, is great for our time, even if it's been used before. And even like you said, either the judgment we feel, the accusation we feel from the law is obviously always still there, but maybe just manifests in different ways. So, um, you you start the book with your first chapter is just on grace, and then you kind of go after that go into all of these other aspects that you see are kind of as a part of grace. Can you kind of walk us through, I guess, like the way the book is organized and these different kind of facets that you identified as ways in which we find relief and what they offer relief from specifically?
sure. Well, yeah. So I took as my conceit or the organizing principle as being a way to catalog the various pressures that we live under, that I live under. In the same way, seculosity tried to do this with replacement religions. I thought about, well, I feel the pressure to improve, or I feel the pressure of the past, and regret. I feel the pressure to produce. And so I wanted to catalog the different pressures and the way
Mm,
that I think grace, the different sort of, I think of grace is like a diamond, the different faces of the diamond. Um, so yeah, I begin by talking really more in terms of sort of, I want to define grace a little bit more and say that we all feel the pressure to deserve what we get
mm,
in life, and that's almost unspoken. Like no one says,
right.
I'm really struggling with the pressure to deserve. It's like, no, like that is simply to be alive.
Right.
Um, but then I wanted to highlight how like if you're struggling with guilt, uh, grace often is going to you're going to feel like atonement has the atonement is sort
Mm,
of where grace will come alive for you. Like if you're in prison, for example, and you hear about the God who suffered or stands in your place, like that's going
yeah.
to really come alive for you. If you're a person who's obsessed with status and feels like that they're just needing to justify themselves all the time and climb some ladder, well, then imputation is going to be an aspect of grace that's going to, I believe, is going to appeal to you. It appeals to me in that space. If
Mm,
you're a person who feels rejected and lonely in life, which is many people, then the fact that when we talk about unmerited favor, I'm gonna emphasize the favor part of that.
right.
Um, and so on and so forth. I think the pressure to produce is a big one today, and so I talk about play as being is basically a euphemism for freedom.
Mm, mm,
Um, and then the ultimate thing that I think that grace is God is interested in rescuing the captive, people who are captive to sin and death, and that's
yeah.
the final chapter. And the fact that we have a Savior is a form of grace, and so
Mm,
that's where it ends. There's other aspects that I didn't even mention, but um, I had to have a organizing conceit, and I wanted it to be the sort of thing where it's if someone says, "Well, I've never committed any crimes. Life has basically gone according to plan." I don't really identify with this, penal substitution stuff. It's like, well, okay, fair enough. Maybe one day you will. Right now, though, do you feel lonely and unloved? Like that might be a
mm-hmm.
place for you to
Yeah.
enter in. Do you have any regrets about the past, things you wish you'd done differently? Let's talk about that. Like, and how forgiveness might have something to say to you. So,
Mm, yeah. Well, I mean, I would even say you do such a good job in every chapter of making these pressures very, very relatable. Like even the chapter on guilt, the whole conversation about false guilt and the guilt that we should feel or shouldn't feel. Like that's a whole thing I think that's important for people to kind of unpack, and totally everyone can relate to. So I think that it's not like, I didn't feel at all like it was like, oh, I'll just read this chapter. It definitely feels like it's a book that you should read straight through for sure. So
Good. It's not supposed to be essays. It's supposed to be
yeah,
building
right.
on each other, and it creates, I think, a more comprehensive picture of our need and the pressure, but also of the glorious gift of grace and how it is.
Hmm.
It's just it's. I'm honestly, Kelsey, I'm trying to like take everything I've ever learned or heard that I think is effective when it comes to um, speaking the word of grace to contemporary people and put it in one book. Like that's
Mm.
one short book that those who haven't been raised in the church or have been raised in the church so much that they can no longer hear what the gospel is. Like I wanted to bring it alive.
Yeah. Yeah, I think before I want to get into kind of some of the sections that you've written about, but you just said something that made me think about a question that I have, and I'm sure we've talked about this before. I think you kind of write about it in the conclusion, but um, is there a need to make, in your mind, make a distinction between God's grace in the sense of his disposition of unmerited favor towards us and the way that we experience that, or the way that um its effective quality, I guess, is that, because that is certainly, I think when it comes to relief, uh that is something that you feel, right? Like it is something that is felt. And I think this is a conversation sometimes around, a theological conversation of like, is it real if you don't feel it, or how do you know it's real?
Hmm.
I don't know, that might be a very convoluted question, but I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on that. Why in your mind is this feeling an important part of how God's grace operates?
Well, I understand the anxiety around tying the doctrine of grace too closely to a feeling of any kind. We want to know that something is true first,
Mm,
and whatever subjective power it might have derives from the objective truth of it. Like I understand that. And I co-sign that. I mean, of course,
yeah,
that's to me true. Something's not true because it feels good. But that doesn't. That's not. That can become in. I've watched it become a way of divorcing uh, faith from your actual life, and
yeah,
the way that people live is not in their heads. People
yeah,
live in their hearts, and that's where the action is happening. So if I want to make a compelling case for the Christian faith in the contemporary world, I want to be emotionally intelligible as well as intellectually plausible. And I think a lot of Christians don't care about, or at least especially frankly, especially men, like it's seen as fault, like untrustworthy
mm,
and a little scary. um be, yeah, so I think the real action that happens in life and is happening in the heart and in the emotions. um so a book that doesn't go there is going to just remain on the surface of things.
yeah,
So but I try to surface that. Like I think, like, if this is really at the heart of who God is, and and it's not something that ever touches down in our lives, or we never catch glimpses of, then what are we talking about? So it's
right. We're talking about definitions
we're,
then.
we're talking about total abstractions.
Yeah,
And so that is very important to me. To I don't think it's zero sum.
yeah, I agree.
We'll put it that way. I don't think it's zero sum. It's been presented as zero sum oftentimes in order to safeguard against the ways that faith has become a purely emotional thing
Mm-hmm.
and a
Mm-hmm.
purely feel better thing, or we call it today the therapeutic aspect of it.
Right.
But on the other hand, if your faith is no consolation to you, actually in your heart, then I question what it is you're actually why?
Yeah,
That's
right. Yeah, and who are you then? Like there's all these then questions of, I think, they're like existential at their basis. Like, who are you? Who is God? Why did he create you with
yeah.
feelings and a body and a heart? So yeah, I think that I like that idea of it's not zero sum. I think is important and and frees us a little bit to be like, God's going to show up when and where he chooses, and to ignore the goodness that he does give us seems a little bit silly at times.
Yeah. I just acknowledge that it's a response to a legitimate concerns people
Sure.
have about it, what feels good must be true. Like
Yeah.
that's not what I'm trying to say in this book, but I'm
Yeah.
saying that ultimately the hinge points of your life are the times you experience or don't experience some form of grace.
Mm.
And if you're dishonest, like let's be honest about that. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is when you start crying, is when you experience something you don't deserve, or when you receive a gift that totally undoes you because it says how known you are and how it's from the outside. Like that to me only adds to the power and the compelling aspect and the urgency of God's grace.
Yeah, I agree. In the first chapter, you talk some about um, these hierarchies of deserving, and you kind of outline um, the different ways in which these hierarchies can function. Like, it's not necessarily the way we always assume. Can you talk us through kind of what you mean by a hierarchy of deserving and how that can kind of show up in different forms in our lives?
A hierarchy of deserving would be the better you do, or better you act, the better the more loved you are. Like any
Yeah.
kind of ladder uh, structure that we do it all the time in religion. Any kind of ladder we erect where the good people get the good stuff and the bad people get the bad stuff. It's a very default calculus of the human spirit, and most of us, he's making a list, he's checking it twice, he's going to find out who's naughty or nice. I mean, this is right at the heart of how we presume the universe operates. It's circular exchange. And I, grace inverts that. It's just like it's an alternative to it. I think a lot of
Mm.
times when we despair, it's because we believe that we've done wrong, we know who we are, and we know what we deserve, and there's no possibility of anything beyond that. And that, so why continue living?
Mm.
Or uh, one strike and you're out kind of thing. Like a hierarchy of deserving. It says that the way to deal with wrongdoing as well is through punishment and consequence.
Mm.
And that may be true in a lot of ways, but I guarantee you that the that most loving relationships have in some sense at some point suspended the hierarchy of deserving, and
Yeah.
there's been a position of mercy that's been taken. um, and otherwise you just don't stay close to people who you feel you are earning their attention all the time. It's just like,
Right.
you know
Yeah. That's interesting. Like the hierarchy, even though it is so natural to function that way, and like you said, sometimes probably even necessary for just life to function, it's interesting to think that true relationship, at some point that hierarchy has to break down, or it has to like not work for there to be true relationship.
if it's just scorekeeping,
Yeah.
resentment and hiding is, or escape is the, or just disaster is the end of it.
Mm.
But you're right. Of course, hierarchies of deserving are. It's like it's kind of the first use of the law of,
Mm.
you drive too fast, you get a ticket.
Right.
We don't want people to be killed. We want the red lights to signify not don't drive. Um, but when it comes to the deeper things, when it comes to the more lasting things, and when it comes to how Jesus operates too, Like, he simply doesn't really relate to people on the basis of what they deserve. He relates to them on the basis of who he is,
Mm.
and that's a key distinction. And I don't think it's just, if that's how what Jesus is revealing about who God is, then the fabric of the whole universe is going to reveal that at times. It's going to point in that direction. There'll be little glimpses, points of light. Um, so yeah, and I try to tell stories about when that happens and how it makes all the difference.
Yeah. And I think that point that you just made about it not always being, or it's not, um, grace isn't necessarily a complete inversion of the hierarchy of deserving, in the sense that then it's based on what you don't deserve. Because you tell the story of George Costanza, right, and him trying to get an apartment or something. Maybe you can tell it better for me, but based on his suffering. But grace is based on who Jesus is. I think that that's an important distinction. It's not based on all of a sudden how lowly or how much pain or whatever we've been through in life.
Yeah, that's just a different type of hierarchy of deserving. If you're being preferences according to how much you've suffered, then there's still, it's an indexed, like the love you receive is indexed to something that you're bringing to the table,
Mm.
and that's not grace. I mean, that might be, might be nice, but it's just a different version of a hierarchy of deserving. You no longer deserve according to your virtue, but you deserve according to your victimhood, and that's just again, as we see in contemporary society, that just becomes a competition to see who's suffered the most, or who's
Right.
been oppressed the most. And um, there's reasons why, these people, then you just become, everything becomes a contest. It's just a different form of the law. And
Yeah.
I don't think grace is really um, is it operates kind of outside those bounds, you might
Yeah.
say. I don't want to, inversion is can be a tough way to think about it.
Mm. You write about how forgiveness, so you have a chapter on forgiveness, and how forgiveness by definition is undeserved. And I think that that's actually a little bit of a tougher pill to swallow for people. Like, I think people kind of naturally get this idea that grace is undeserved. And like you said, it has kind of kept this positive connotation, but forgiveness for some people, I think, has even lost that. And um, I think that's maybe because, like, the idea that forgiveness is undeserved hits people the wrong way a lot of times, because forgiveness is automatically attached to wrongdoing or like an injustice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is that kind of what's going on there? And then if that's the case, how do we make sense of forgiveness, and maybe what is a key distinction in how we should think about it as compared to just grace itself? Obviously, it's a facet, but
I think, I mean, yeah, people hate forgiveness.
yeah,
We love it when it applies to us, but we
yeah,
don't like it. We think forgiveness is the end point of a process in which the other person needs to deserve it through groveling or restitution or repentance, uh, and that, in my mind, blunts, or it mutes the power of forgiveness, which you only need forgiveness if you've done wrong. Like, it's
right.
and that's why I try to, honestly, Kelsi, I try to begin by talking about forgiveness in terms of debt. I think
Mm,
debt is we talk about debts being forgiven. And I think it's a softer way into the questions to talk about debts. Like, everyone has debts that they would like to see forgiven.
mm-hmm.
Or if they don't, then that's amazing. But then there might be emotional debts or something, productivity
Right.
debts or something like that. But we know that only outside parties have the ability to forgive the dead. It doesn't necessarily involve an infraction, but there's a burden to it. And
Mm,
I know that if my mortgage were paid off, I would feel relief. and I can't do it because I don't have that kind of money. And so if a third party were to come in and say, I'm going to forgive that debt, AKA, I had someone who gave us a loan for a house we bought, because, again, no one can afford houses
Yeah.
anymore. So someone gave us a loan, and, no interest loan. And it was a very, very kind thing to do. And, they recently called me up and said, this was 10 years later, they said, we're going to forgive that loan. Um,
Hmm.
and I felt enormous relief. I felt
Hmm.
gratitude. I felt excitement. Um, Now, that was a form of forgiveness that was just simply financial. When it gets to forgiveness of a crime or forgiveness of a hurt, then we always want to be in the realm of kind of like, they didn't say they're sorry, so I won't forgive them. That's how it is with like my kids.
Right.
And I think forgiveness is a posture that we don't like for that reason. We don't want anyone to get off scot free.
Right.
But um, this is the hard part, because a lot of times people think forgiveness is equivalent to saying it didn't matter, it didn't, that what happened to you, or it didn't hurt. Um, Forgiveness doesn't involve, I don't think, forgiveness, if it's portrayed as sort of allowing abuse to continue, I don't think that's not the scandal of forgiveness. The scandal of
Right.
forgiveness is that the perpetrator has a second chance, or has a new lease on life. The scandal is not that the victim continues to get abused. Like, that's,
Right.
um and to modern Americans are pretty sensitive to that, and I think in a lot of good ways, and in some ways that then get co-opted for self-justification, etc. But yeah, forgiveness is a really tricky one, I think, because I think when it comes to God, the forgiveness um, is more radical than we tend to give it credit for, and the human being is always trying to place conditions on forgiveness,
Hmm.
because we want to bring it under our control, because it inverts hierarchies of deserving.
Yeah.
I haven't probably answered your question. I just know
No,
that
I don't
for
even know if I really asked a question, but I think that was all great. So, yeah, I think forgiveness is so tricky. And I think, I've, um, as someone who believes deeply in it, talks about it, writes about it, when, when push comes to shove, it's so, it's so much more difficult to actually practice. And I think you write a little bit about the need to talk about forgiveness, in kind of like these, in relation to like smaller infractions, like between spouses, and I that just brought, I think that that's so true. Like, it's easy, even if we hate forgiveness or it's offensive to us when we see it in kind of these big, picture, amazing, incredible stories. When it comes to, forgiving my husband for not putting his laundry in the laundry basket, like, I don't want to do that. I just want him to change. And
Yeah,
there's something to like, in those cases, there's something to it too, which means that I have to just still deal with that. And I
hmm
just like, I don't want to do that. Like,
there's a cost to forgiveness.
there's a cost. Yeah.
There's always
Yeah.
a cost to it, and that's why Christians talk about the cost of forgiveness. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
and I also want to say that, like, I've tried to foreground the fact that forgiveness is a miracle if it ever happens, and we believe that it happens at least with God, and
Mm,
it's a miracle. And the command to forgive your enemies is the height of the law.
mm,
And yet, if you've ever been someone's enemy, because if you can't conceive of yourself that way, if people who don't have the imagination to know that, to think about the fact that someone out there might consider them an enemy,
right.
like, then we've lost our kind of our Christian imagination, I think. But the hope of the gospel is not that you and I will be able to forgive more, although that would be great.
Right.
The hope of the gospel is that God has forgiven even you, um,
Yeah.
and he's not holding your past against you.
Hmm.
And I talk about atonement in terms of more the cost that's paid. Um, and that's why all of these aspects are like interlinked. There's not like some clear demarcation outside of
Right.
pages in a book.
Hmm.
But I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it. I started talking about debt, and then I wanted to talk about massive things, but also small things, because forgiveness can be more one-to-one. It's not necessarily a crime involved, but there is a relational burden to it. There's not a crime involved when your husband has not put away his laundry, or he's said a mean thing, or said a
only
mean thing
only a
to you.
crime to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're a person who feels like you live in a courtroom all your life, which a lot of people do,
Right.
then like atonement is going to sort of put flesh on the bones of forgiveness in a way that I think is going to speak to you.
Yeah, I think those two chapters are interesting because the pressures you're talking about too are related as well, right? Like freedom from, or relieving the pressure of
Regret
regret,
in the
and
past.
then the relief from guilt. What is the distinction in your mind between those two things, from regret and guilt? Is it just this timing issue of the past and regret, or is there something else going on there?
I think regret doesn't always have as much of a moral connotation as guilt does.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it can be something you just personally regret. Guilt is something that you did wrong. Like it's
Mm.
meaning I regret that I wasn't that I didn't save enough money when I was a kid, or something like that, or that I didn't spend more time with my grandmother. But guilt is that I actively hurt my grandmother, or like that there's something a little bit more benign about regret, but also more universal. And so if you'll notice, the regret chapter comes before the guilt chapter, because I think the guilt chapter is a heavy one. And
Mm.
the challenge of this book was to pace it so that it wasn't all the heavy stuff at the front. But guilt is usually a kind of a deeper thing. And it can have to do with a court of law, in a way that regret can just be, I wish I'd seen that dysfunction, that problem that my child is exhibiting as a 13-year-old. I wish I'd nipped it in the bud when they were 7. Like that is,
Sure. Yeah.
there is I think an emotional difference, if not necessarily like a theological one.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to talk a little bit about your chapter on surrender, which you define as relief from control, because I think that's a big one. I mean, personally, that's a big one. I think that's also just a big one for a lot of people. And you write about the illusion of control in terms of this word technique, which I think I've heard you talk about technique before and write about it over the last few years. And I think it's such a astute and helpful takeaway, it has been for me. So I kind of wanted you to walk us through what you mean by this term technique. What does that idea promise people? And then also, what does it actually, in your mind, lead to?
Sure. It's a term that's borrowed from the French Christian anarchist thinker Jacques Ellul. I hope I'm saying that right. And I'd stumbled across it through a couple of other thinkers, actually, not directly from Ellul, but I've read about it now. And technique is the pressure to streamline, optimize towards efficiency. It's this idea that everything needs to get more efficient, that your life needs to get faster, and that, or just everything you do has to have a purpose to it. So technique is the sum total of all of the energy we expend for the sake of like bringing more efficiency to life. And it describes a whole heck of a lot of our energy, I think.
Yeah.
Control is the pressure to control everything about your life and the world is an enormous pressure, and it's like irrational. I mean, it's like a subconscious almost. I mean, it's just like a huge animating force, because there's so much out of our control, and so we try to control it. Technique, the way I describe it in the book, I think this is maybe a helpful thing for people, is we my kids are at this stage where they're having to do lots of, homework, and the school systems have introduced all sorts of apps to help them with that. You do your homework on the app, you press submit. There's no one turning in papers at the end of the day, and maybe that's been the case for a long time. But in the COVID pandemic and remote learning, this like got really supercharged, and so
Mm.
parents were constantly having to like log into Zamblzoot to to get the grade from Cracklezam so that the kids could do their assignments. And it was an attempt to be more efficient that ended up, I felt like most of my parent friends would say that we all spent all of our time like updating the software, filling out 2-factor authentications, and yelling at our kids for losing their computers. Like, it's just like it didn't actually, it just created more problems than
Yeah.
it solved. And that's what technique does. Technique does it. We think it's going to make our lives more convenient, and more easy, but it makes it more complicated and difficult. And this is the reason why our phones work the way they do.
Mm.
They were supposed to make life free up time. What they've done is they've gobbled all of our time. So
Yeah.
in that realm, I was trying to use that as a way to understand how our thirst for control ends up controlling us,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it exerts a huge amount of, and we do not, the attempt to control everything under the sun is a law with no possible satisfaction, and we don't have the means to do it. That surrender is the form that grace often takes, and that's I mean, I'm really looking at agency in that chapter,
Right.
um, and that to those who have been told that they need to control everything, to be told to surrender is both fear is totally terrifying, and yet the experience of it is you surrender and the world keeps going. You let go because you have no other choice.
Mm.
It's not like it's a desperation thing, and you experience that God shows up in those moments, like, and
Yeah.
that's how I think there's a monergistic uh element here, that how, like, theologically how we would talk about it.
Mm.
And I think that translates into these dynamics in practice.
Yeah. You kind of already mentioned this, but and you mentioned it also in the book. There does seem to be this relationship between the desire for control and yet the reality that we are captives, and that we are kind of bound. Can you talk a little bit more about how that tends to play out? I mean, it seems like you already kind of did in this whole idea of technique as kind of a manifestation of that. Like, the more we think we're optimizing, the less we are. But what's the relationship there? This idea, I guess, that we think that we can control and we can choose everything, and yet often I think in pursuits of that we tend to become more and more bound up, I guess, in ourselves, maybe.
Captive is the word. I mean,
Yeah.
I use the
Yeah.
word captive in the because I think a lot of our experience of our lives is not just seeking relief; it's seeking relief from captivity.
Mm.
And what is it you're captive to? That depends at any given day. We're all captive to our mortality. We're all captive to aging bodies and time.
Mm.
We're all. But this is why addiction has become such a powerful metaphor, or just language, to understand the spiritual life. It's something that Lutherans, I think, grasp almost instinctively, but that everyone's addicted to something.
Yeah.
And this used to be a harder sell for people, but today, with phones and the way that we relate to media and social media, like, it's not hard to tell people, oh yeah, you're not actually totally in control of yourself, and you scroll through things when you should be going to bed.
Mm-hmm.
You can't seem to stop looking at your phone when you shouldn't. But I think so. I wanted to excuse me, enter into the ultimate relief of grace, which is that to those who are dying, a savior has been given. Like that eternal life is the resurrection is on offer to those who have who will expire, and are condemned to death. In fact. So captivity is I think a really helpful helpful terminology, because it's prisoners is another way to talk about it, but a lot of what technique involves is simply like rearranging the furniture in your cell to make the layout feng shuied, like it's
right.
But what you actually need is not a nicer chair in your prison cell. You need someone to let you out of the cell, even though you may often choose to stay in the cell.
Right.
So the book, if it was going to talk about grace in its ultimate sense, had to talk about resurrection, and to those who are captive to heaven, to those who are captive to hell, like that absurd notion that, and let me just not say it, not absurd, audacious, unbelievably audacious claim that that the brick wall of death, of the grave, there's actually a door. That's the grace. That is grace to me.
Yeah, and that's I think the ultimate expression of it too, right? Like that's why you end the book that way, because everything kind of points to that reality.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. That's what I'm banking on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, again, I want the book to, if there might be some chapters that appeal to people more than others. But I also wanted to bring to bear, after 20 years of preaching and talking about this, what are the stuff that I find that has the most traction and reality to it, as well as, and there's tons of scripture in this book. For those who've read anything else I've written, like I wanted this book to be 10% more Christian than the last one. I wanted it to, because I had a couple of people comment. It's like, I'm not sure if is this a Christian book or not? And it's like, well, you haven't read it carefully enough if that was your response.
About the big relief, or about
low anthropology.
So I wanted
there to be more scripture. I wanted there to be more Christianity, because that's where I think true hope lies.
Well, I think you upped it 10% for sure. And that's so funny to hear that, because I don't know how you would read low anthropology and come away not thinking it was Christian, but like you said, they probably didn't read close enough.
Well, I had someone said that in a major publication. It's like, this is too Christian for non-Christians, and it's not Christian enough for Christians. And I was like, well, I just wrote the book that I was able to write, so that's where I'm at.
Oh, well, tell us before you go where we can find your work, what you have coming up, and then I think that the book will be out by the time this releases, but maybe just remind me here so that people listening know as well.
Yeah, The Big Relief comes out April 29th. It's from Brazos Press. You can get it anywhere books are sold. I personally narrated the audiobook, so that'll be out too.
Oh, great.
Mockingbird has its big annual conference in New York in early May, where we're going to be talking about this book. And I'll be at the 1517 conference in the fall at the Here We Still Stand in San Diego. But you can find most of what I do on ember.com. I co-host the Mockingcast and the Brothers Zahl podcast, which are available anywhere you can find podcasts. So yeah, I'll be writing and talking about this book, and also trying to not go crazy and actually experience some relief, and not turn the big relief into the huge pressure cooker.
That's my prayer for you. That's great. Well, thanks,
so
Dave.
Funny. I feel so much relief having written The Big Relief. It's like Yeah. Anyway, thank you,
Yeah.
Kelsi. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time. It's good to see you. And I'm excited for people to read this book. It's really great. So appreciate your time talking more about it.
Thank you.
Outside Ourselves is a 1517 podcast and show. To learn more about all of our podcasts and all of our shows, please go to 1517.org/podcast. Rate the show if you haven't done so already. I'd love if you could give Outside Ourselves a 5-star review wherever you are listening. And if you haven't done so yet, please check out the show on YouTube. There you can not only listen, but you can also watch. So make sure you subscribe to the Kelsi Cumbera YouTube channel so you won't miss any of my upcoming content. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you back here in a couple weeks with our next guest.